Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to another Kaizen Central from Zanuk TV. Great to see everybody, and hope everybody's keeping busy, safe, well, etc., etc. We live in strange times, obviously, given the election in America. I'm sure that Simon in Washington, D.C. will have some reflections on that. We might also try to reflect if there is anything that the election results well, we don't have a result. What am I talking about? So Steve Murphy the other night on Adam's Twitter chat said we won't have a result by then. And of course I laughed at you, Steve, and I apologize because you're absolutely right.
Did I? Finger on the pulse.
Yeah, well, there we go. Adrian, good evening to you.
Good evening, Nick. Good evening.
And how are you?
Oh, so far so good, thank you.
Well,
thank you.
You've only been here a minute. You wait. It can only get better.
Can only get better.
Yeah, I said in my email, which you wouldn't have received, Adrian. I apologize. I don't think I've got your email address.
Okay.
But I suggested, given that last week we discussed the issue of sort of resilience, almost a kind of how companies were going to get through lockdown, pandemic, and the wider ramifications. And I just suggested we maybe just a suggestion, because somebody may have other thoughts about whether we can narrow that down to some specific strategies around innovation. What kind of innovative ways are people changing their working habits, processes in response to the pandemic or not? I don't know. I just throw that out there to see if anybody's got some thoughts on that, and whether that's a subject worthy of discussion. Would anybody like just to chip in and kick this off?
Well, I'll say something to start with, Nick. I did watch a webinar this morning that was hosted by, I think he's the deputy director with Made Smarter, and it's about the money that the government is putting into innovation over the next number of years. I believe it runs till 2025. And I asked about the supply chain that was going to be involved, and did it need to be British based rather than materials coming from other parts of the world. And the emphasis was on, yes, it should be British based, because once you've established that supply chain and then you're producing British products, you can then market it, well, not only to other British companies, but also as a genuinely British product overseas. And I was quite encouraged by that. It was a case of keeping it British. And I think that's a good thing. And I think, well, if we can establish, how do you put it, more local supply chains, then I think there's a lot of encouragement with potentially working with people who are, possibly your neighbours or within 30, 40 miles, rather than having to drag materials halfway across the world and then send them off somewhere again.
Well, that's actually a very interesting point, and that really goes to something that we were discussing on Twitter on Tuesday, which was precisely this. Adam, can I ask you to reflect on that, because I thought that's very interesting that Adrian picked up on that.
Yeah, and it was only this morning that, Nick, and I literally made some notes because I thought it might be useful.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a couple of questions, wasn't it? We were discussing. I know Steve was on there, Nick, and others. About reshoring and reshoring into the UK, how we go about it, and what do we need to do, and it opened up a number of quite good discussions. I think one tweet was price, and I think that was Joe Reynolds, I think it was, and then Nick had put on some good points about quality product development, innovation, and getting it all right, because it comes as a complete package. Steve was saying the same as well. So I think it is. There's definitely seems to be an appetite there. I've seen a number of Facebook groups pop up in with quite big numbers in buying British, and there are consumers asking, where can I buy this from a British manufacturer? Now that has intrigued me, and that's what sparked me off in asking the question, as I said to Nick, on Tuesday. So there definitely seems to be an appetite there. There's a long way and a long thing to, lots of things to do to get that right, without a shadow of a doubt. But it's certainly, there is certainly intrigue there.
Angelo, sorry, you popped your hand up. Good evening to you.
Adam, do you think any of that is driven by the fact that we've been in lockdown? Obviously, it's our second one. And I know particularly in the first one, there was a big drive from people to buy local and support the local community. And I know I've seen a lot on Facebook and on LinkedIn of people saying, you know, I want to buy my Christmas presents, but I want to buy them from local people. I want to buy them, you know, from companies within the UK. Do you think maybe that is one of the drivers?
If I look at it, because obviously I've got the Business Growth Academy, which is like the lower end and out of the manufacturing sector. So I've got a number of different things that I monitor and look at, different Facebook groups and things like that. There is a definite appetite around driving and buying local and also buying British. Some of that is driven by obviously Brexit and that side, because we've got obviously the people that voted for Brexit. And that seems to be quite a big contingent from what I can see. But I think there's a whole ethos around it now in supporting local due to the COVID you know, situation. You can definitely see it. It's definitely there from you know, from the media platforms that I've been on, definitely. Now, manufacturers, we may not see it because it's sort of like out the sector, but there's definitely people asking, where can I get this? Where can I get? Is there a manufacturer that does this? You know, one of them was actually sort of like, where can I buy a British-made a designed car? You know, so it was quite some quite interesting ones.
I think we've had a lot of cottage industries springing up as well because of the situation, who potentially may be our future manufacturers.
Can you give an example of that, Angela? Because that's very interesting. I think that, you know, obviously, are you talking about sort of craft as in artisanal, sort of fairly traditional stuff, handmade stuff, that we're maybe developing a whole new array of such sort of, as you say, cottage industries?
I think I know a couple of times I came across people who were actually making scrubs for hospitals from their bedroom. They'd just taken it up just because they knew that there was a shortage of them. They were making bags for nurses and doctors to put their clothes in to bring them home to wash. And as you say, yes, artisanal as well. There's just been a huge variety of little cottage industries seem to have sprung up. People making face masks and face coverings, and as I say, it makes you wonder sort of like whether those will develop into small manufacturers.
I don't know if anybody saw the video of Jürgen Meyer and his partner 3D printing face masks for the local old people's home. It was quite funny during the first lockdown. I say funny, it was actually very heartwarming, but it was just interesting to see their dining room table had a 3D printer and they were making things. Stephen, you had a point you wanted to make, I believe.
No.
Mute.
That's Stephen Barr, yeah.
Shall I mime? Would that be easiest? So there's sock puppets. I just thought it might be interesting to reflect on what's different now. So for years we've had initiatives, websites like Make It in Britain, Make It in Kent, Make It in every county, focusing on local businesses that are supremely capable. It just seems now we've got to the real cliff edge of Brexit and COVID, opening our eyes up to what neighborhoods can do. We needed those major events in society to make us wake up to the fact we have some fantastic businesses in the UK. I mean, what a terrible shame that it took that to get us to the point of thinking about buying British. But and that makes me worry about how sustainable this buy British feeling will actually be.
Well, I think that's right, because I think we discussed this before, and I know you know, I'm bound to mention China, and I'm not, we've discussed a lot of that in previous meetings, but I just think that the appetite for ready-made consumer goods, we don't make that many consumer goods in this country. We make quite a few, but I mean, when people like Laura Ashley are going out of business, and a lot of people have gone under, it does make you wonder whether we can compete, or whether we just have got to have that consumer mindset change, where I'm going to buy something that's going to last me 5 years and it's very high quality, and priced accordingly, rather than something I'm going to wear 5 or 6 times and chuck in the skip. Julian, good evening. Sorry, you had your hand raised. Yeah.
Yeah, sort of. I hope this isn't going to be too unpopular, but I voted to remain, and I'm really worried about jingoism and protectionism, and I do understand the popularity or the populism associated with buy local, but I just feel fundamentally that if we're buying local, there's, for me, good reasons and bad reasons. The good reason would be, global warming, the unnecessary. If we can produce tomatoes here, we don't need to spend the fuel cost bringing them up from Italy or whatever it might be, worse than that all over the world. I'm completely supportive, but I'm very worried about the idea that you should buy British because it's British, as opposed to it being a superior product or something that's obviously better on a sort of totality of, when you weigh everything up, including fuel costs and transportation, it's an inferior product. I don't really understand the concept of buy British.
Yeah, I've got thoughts on that, but Ran, hi, you want to chip in?
Yeah, extending what Julian just mentioned, we're looking at buy British as a cause, or not buying British as a cause, but in fact, we need to look at it as the effect of why people aren't buying British. We shouldn't buy British for the sake of buy British. Buying British will automatically happen when we are able to deliver quality and value at a price, which I don't think we are at the moment. When that happens, this buy British thing will automatically happen. It's going to be a downstream consequence of what we do, rather than forcing people to do it as a cause.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, that totally.
There's a point, Nick. I don't think you'll mind me mentioning an article here in the Manufacturer Sees the Supply Chain Opportunity, which just gives, for example, Albert Jagger as a company that have saved between 20 and 60% of the value of their stock by sourcing locally rather than overseas. That's by smaller quantities, faster delivery of the right stuff, higher quality, and this is happening by itself. It can happen by itself without the general public having to think, as Julian is saying, buy British. Also, another article with Chamber of Commerce mentioned the same thing. It just occurs to me as a question to the group and elsewhere: is there a way for SMEs to a tool or a methodology to evaluate their supply chain? Where is the potential where they've got higher costs have been rising and rising over time? It's out there. This is what we do. There's a kind of an elastic band effect, and suddenly the elastic band is shooting back potentially. Well, let's look at all of that. Is there a way of evaluating supply chain to look at not only where we can shorten the supply chain and improve it, buy more locally? As some businesses go out of business, there's going to be more demand coming on others in that way in the UK, I would have thought.
Yeah, Ram.
I've got a question actually for everybody. How are we defining something that's made in Britain? Is it every part that goes into a final assembly that is made in Britain, or is it things get made everywhere else and the final assembly happens, therefore the final piece is made in Britain, therefore we made it in Britain? How are we defining it?
Well, you can ask the EU what rules of origin mean to them, and you can ask the WTO what rules of origin are going to mean to us, I guess. But I mean, in cars, for instance, I mean, there are very few cars. I was quite astounded when McLaren built their monocell factory up next door to the AMRC in Rotherham.
Oh, yeah.
And I was quite astonished that it was, I think it was about the only part that that at that stage they were making in the UK. The monocells used to be made in Austria before then. Just about everything else was made somewhere. Oh no, they did have some stuff made down. Their engines were assembled by Ricardo in Shoreham and elsewhere. But it's, you know, car makers are just assembly. You know, they're just assembly lines. They're not manufacturing lines really in that sense. So you know, you can swap in, swap out if you've got the reliability. On Tuesday, I told the story, and I'll tell it now because I thought this was a fascinating example of how companies compete in this day and age when you've got long supply lines, but also cheap components. Siemens in Congleton is a fascinating factory. It's very unlike many factories that you'll find because it's actually bounded on one side by a river and on other three sides by a road and a housing estate. And they can't go, they can't expand. And the Siemens policy is that if you're making stuff, you don't just have to compete against other companies globally, you have to compete against other companies in your group. So the pressure is really on. And they make drivers and controls. And in order to compete against much cheaper and possibly not quite as good, but definitely cheaper products, was that they completely and ruthlessly stripped every inch of their processes down to the bone in terms of lean, and instituted customer-facing processes, particularly online in terms of ordering and choice. So they expanded accessibility, choice. They sped up their production line and had it delivered within, I think there was a 48 or 72 hour window. Quite expensive bits of kit, but they just made the process so much more efficient. And therefore, I think, as Steve mentioned the other night, is a total TQM result. That and that's how to do it. And so, you know, this jingoistic thing I get really annoyed by, because that's the slippery slope to what Julian said, the protectionism, where because we can rely on people to buy our products because they're British, we don't have to be quite so good. They can be a little bit rubbish, like some of our cars used to be. And that's where laziness creeps in. So anyway, I just throw that out there. I just thought that was a really interesting story from Siemens. Yeah, Julian.
Does everybody remember the little triangular label for the design council? You know, you used to get the a little tag that hung off the side of a product, and it was the sort of I think it was called I think the kite mark was the safety thing, but the design council had this triangular thing, which sort of gave consumer confidence that there was a you know, it's sort of great and the good was sitting around looking at these products and had taken the effort away from the consumer and had said, look, this is a good product. Why can't we have that in manufacturing? Why can't we have somebody or some independent authority reassuring people that that how a product is made, or that it's using the best processes, or I don't know what the algorithm would be or the attributes would be, but food labeling has got so complicated now, and unless I put my glasses on, I just give up, you know, in the supermarkets. But I'd love to think that if I bought a product as a consumer, all the things we've spoken about so far this evening, like weighing up, you know, energy consumption, efficiency, the degree of locality of local suppliers, improvement on design, materials efficiency, or there would be a complex mix, but wouldn't it be wonderful? You know, it would influence trade, business to business purchasing as well as consumer purchasing.
Steve, hi.
Isn't that what Plan B does? If you'll see, some companies are starting to advertise themselves as Plan B, and the only one I know off the top of my head is Alpkit, who make but that there are awards like that. Patagonia use 1% for the environment. So you're right. There's not one or two universal awards, but there are a few things around. When I have in the past for my sins been forced to fill in a big sort of exercise called EcoVadis. So if you actually work and produce products for the French railways, that's exactly what they ask you to do. You must, they will ask you this whole series of questions, and you have to say, yes, we negotiate with the unions, and you have to give things like minutes of meetings and say, this is how we've done good work, this is how we've done bad work. You have to say how you're using less water, how you don't irradiate the newts and everything has to be evidence-based, you know. But that's probably not well known amongst consumers. Yeah, but there are sort of lurking around there, probably just a bit under the radar. There are various methodologies that could be within the direction that you're talking about, Julian.
Barry.
I'm just saying, guys, just be careful what we wish for. All right, there's, that's ISO. What we're talking, 14,001, 9,001, 27,001, or whatever they are. With bureaucracy kills productivity as well, and we're talking about being competitive, and all of this just costs money, and it's just we get it all the time. Someone think, like in the construction line, and then Chaz, and they're all the same questions, yet they charge you a whole load of more money to get the different badge, and it's just someone else. It's job creation. Someone coming up with a new scheme.
I'm sorry, Barry, but if you think ISO 9001 is costing people, then I would probably say you're not doing it properly to them. That's what I would say. But I'm a Six Sigma geek, and I just
yeah, it's a cost, because once I've done it, I don't need someone to come twice a year to tell me I'm still doing it. It's true though. I get charged through the nose for someone to come out and say, "Oh, you've got a minor non-conformance." So once you've done it for a couple of years, you've got your defect system in, and it's all doing that, and you're doing all your Kaizen, all your Six Sigma stuff, and you're pushing out, it's CIs embedded and all of that. Why do I need someone to come along and charge me an absolute fortune to tell me I'm doing it?
Okay,
the US,
I'm going to ask
the US.
Sorry.
The US do it the opposite, and the US certify you to test yourself.
That's the point I was going to ask. That's the point I was going to ask, because I'm not a manufacturer, so I don't know how all that works. I'll give you an example of what I think you may be talking about, Barry, from the legal sector, because my wife is a lawyer, and a law firm that she consults for has this thing called Lexel accreditation, which is something for the consumer to look at, to say, right, these people know how, they conform absolutely rigidly to best practice in the law. And she said it's an absolute bloody nightmare to go through their audit and all of that, added to which most of the things these people insist on are actually encouraging inefficiencies, such as retention of paper documents, et cetera, instead of finding new ways of running a business without paper. All it means is a proliferation of stuff. So if these ISO things, you've got to ask who keeps the keepers, who's monitoring them, who's telling them that what they're asking are absolutely the right questions that are designed, without a shadow of a doubt, to achieve the results that everybody would hope they get from it. I mean, and so I take your point, Barry, about should be the other way around, that you should be good enough to be able to certify yourself.
No,
Can I just say two things about that? One is that the ISO organization does change, but they're like all big bureaucracies, it takes time. But the one element that, and I don't have a strong argument either way, because I've been involved in both types of organizations, but the one argument against Barry's view is the Boeing 737 MAX.
And the Dreamliner.
Right, not the Dreamliner. Dreamliner hasn't crashed and killed anybody.
So, but the battery's caught on fire.
Yeah, but that didn't crash and kill anybody.
Okay, well, explain that point, Simon.
My point is that the lax management behaviors that were in place at Boeing were as a result of self-regulation. They were the certified examiner of themselves by the FDA, which meant that the FDA weren't going in and doing things like fundamental reviews of new software. That review was done, or those reviews were done by Boeing. They missed the mistakes, and the result was a couple of crashes. And goodness alone knows what value loss to Boeing. They've actually been lucky in one respect in that we had COVID, because they were able to put all of their undelivered aircraft on the ground before COVID occurred. But beside the point, the point was that they were self-certifying, and self-certification works extremely well, but you still have to have someone going in to make sure that you're still doing it properly. I agree it shouldn't necessarily be twice a year at high cost, but it does need to be part of the process.
Wow, that's a sobering observation. Thank you. Yeah, I take the point, Barry. What I mean, in an ideal world, how would you see it work? Taking on board what Simon just said.
I see a one global standard for. My point was, don't wish up more standards. Don't wish up, can we get this badge? Can we get, because it's just bureaucracy going mad and thinking, I think that was my major point. And just going to the export one, because we're a big exporter, about 50% of what we do gets exported. So I sit really on the fence with it, because I was onto a devolved mayor this morning at 11:30 giving him grief that they're not buying local, right? They're buying Polish manufactured equipment owned by a US company installing near our factory. However, strip that back, okay? What are the people in Poland saying? Only buy Polish equipment. Well, I export to Poland. If we create this, you only buy from your country, guess what? Again, be careful what you're wishing for, because if Americans only buy American and the Polish only buy Polish and the Singaporeans only buy Singapore, then my turnover is 50% down. It's a global. I think we've got to think global, and I like what you're saying about just buy the best. And people have different buying criteria of what best is.
Yeah, Angela.
I think one of the.
And we just got to get better.
Sorry, Angela.
Yeah.
I just wanted to play devil's advocate a little bit here, because we're talking about manufacturing to the best quality and to standards, but we have in fact become a throwaway society, and we're used to cheap rubbish. We're used to having imports from China. We're used to throwing our TVs away after a couple of years and our washing machines, whereas years ago they would be made to last. You would have a TV and you would have a TV repairman that would come around and repair it for you. So we're used to being a throwaway society and having cheap, shoddy goods. We know they're like that. So I'm just thinking, we're talking about having high standards for British manufacturing. Do we really need high standards? Devil's advocate.
Mark.
Just an observation on a similar sort of line. Our lives are all tied to manufacturing, but if we try and pull ourselves back from manufacturing, I think a lot of people buy on brand and design. iPhones are designed in California. Nobody cares where they're made. And I think increasingly the younger people and a lot of people, they buy because of the brand and how it looks. They don't care where it's made. I don't believe a lot of people buy Nissan cars because they're built in Britain. They buy a 4x4.
Fair point. I mean, when you were talking there, Angela, all I was thinking about was that I start to get panicky if tech I'm about to buy isn't the latest iteration within 12 months. So I guess I'm part of that, certainly when it comes to tech. You know, I dread buying anything that that may be a couple of years old and doesn't conform to this, that, or the other. You know, that is the other problem. You know, change is happening at a rate that unprecedented in human history.
Can
Bob,
I
good
ask?
evening to you.
Hi there. Yeah, sorry, my technical incompetence showed. I couldn't actually get here for about 20 minutes, but my resilience also showed, and I'm here. Yeah, I'm just curious about, you know, I read a lot about net zero and the kind of youth of the world and everybody else getting concerned about the environment and its #1 world problem. So if we're not building the best to last the longest, to be replaced to the minimum total cycle impact, then what are we doing?
Playing on a sticky wicket.
Making a short-term back, perhaps.
Well, yeah. I mean, ultimately, yeah. There is. If you try and say how many people will the world sustain at a certain standard, there are too many people, and I cannot for the life of me see Africa, South America, and China aspiring to live at the standard that they're living at. They're going to want to live well. So ultimately, it will place stress on the environment. And the only thing I think is, and the sort of way I was thinking was that if you make good things that last a long time and you can charge a premium price for, then what do you do with your money? And the only way that I can think that if you buy things like training and improving your own personal skills, slightly off field, but
historically,
because I'm all in favour of buying stuff. I mean, a lot of my camera kit's second hand. I would never buy a new car. I buy a fair amount of second hand fishing tackle. I just get stuff off eBay because I can get stuff at half the price, and really the limiting factor is my competence. You know, it's certainly not the technical. So, but I think that's more of a modelling, and it puts you, if you did it as a nation, it puts you in a leadership position.
Well,
in other words, you're modelling what you would like, how you would like the world to live, but that's a slightly difficult concept to sell to a lot of people.
You can't do that because people have choice.
Well,
you can't do that because people have choice. So you will always have a full spectrum of a, like anything. You'll have the strong, the weak, and you'll have everything in between it. So someone will buy cheap, someone will buy expensive, probably because they can afford to, others can't. So there's a full spectrum around it. So you can't sort of like narrow the focus and say, bang, that's it. Can't do it. We have the full spectrum and we're led by consumers.
Exactly so. The market will decide that. If I can point out that there's one company that's worth looking at, and Julian, I think that you might like to look at this company called Vitsoe, VITSOE. Originally a German company, I think, and the designer was German, but the company was bought by a Brit who brought it over here, and they've set up a new factory at Aylesbury. And the design has not changed other than tiny tweaks for something like 30, 40, 50 years. They make shelves and furniture. Utterly beautiful stuff. I mean, it's the kind of thing that you know, people who are in design and arts or whatever, they will just give their left arm to own this stuff. It's very expensive and very, very beautiful, and it's the absolute, you know, pinnacle, if you like, of that concept of I only buy one thing and I bought it once and that's it. And it exists, and it's in Aylesbury at the moment. So
it sounds like a very good example of something that's an instant classic, or it's earned its spurs of becoming a classic. And there will always be a place for things that you know, famous chairs and designs and products that, even though design has moved on, people will want them for for the reason that they are classics. But if I can just come back, Nick, on a couple of points that have been said already. One is that my son's just finished a course in Italy, for that matter, a university called NABA, and his thesis was on a utopia around not recycling, but the idea that something could be manufactured with modern materials that can be repurposed, can be thought again. So it's the ultimate ephemeral, disposable product, but not disposable in a destructive way, but disposable in the sense of, I no longer need it in that form and I'm going to reform it. Now it's very utopian and it's a lot to do with material science and the way that people consume, but it's a way that a lot of young designers are now not thinking about permanence. And the reason I agree with that is I think that making something that you never need to change, with due apologies to what's been already said, is a killer of innovation. And we need people, we need to be efficient in the way that something is made. It doesn't consume a lot of energy to make it, and it can be repurposed, or it can be sold down the food chain. Somebody bought it expensively, like secondhand cars. It has a very long life. You don't need to retain these things as individuals. And I think it's counterintuitive. I think we need products to be constantly revised, to otherwise innovation will die.
Well, that argues for the servitized model, for instance, where you could rent the highest quality stuff and then say, okay, they're beginning to rent. John Lewis is renting furniture, IKEA's renting furniture, but there are other things. I mean, my classic story is about the coffee machine maker. Hope I haven't told you before, but where they were getting undercut in the marketplace by their own products in the secondhand market. Because they were so good that, just like the cameras that Steve buys and the fishing rods, you might as well buy one of these coffee machines for half the price of a new one, because it's just as good. So they stopped selling coffee machines. They put sensors inside them, and they put them out in a servitized way. So they turned it into product as a service, and the machines would tell head office how many cups had been made, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so you had complete understanding of the life cycle of the machine. Maintenance was easy. And then when people said, I want to have a different one, they say, fine, that's great. And they then gave these again as products as a service to perhaps a less affluent cafe. And it was a way of keeping total control over their market, while giving people the opportunity to change if they wanted.
No, makes sense.
I've got in my hand this book called The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman. I'm a big fan of his work. What you see here is an object that people bought because it looks beautiful. It's utterly useless. It's a kettle with the handle and the spout on the same side. It's utterly useless as a kettle, but it's apparently a piece of art. And I would recommend everybody to read this book called The Design of Everyday Things and look up Donald Norman. It's a fascinating study on not just how we design products, how we make them, but what are our inner motivations that force us to buy these gorgeous looking, utterly useless things as well. And it's fascinating study in human psychology. Coming to the point about the coffee machines, Nick, I think Mike Morris has an experience with his printer where he's got a printer, but he's got a subscription for replacing his ink on his printer, which they send him out because he's got the printer. I think servitization and the subscription model. So that's where we are going, I think, as society.
Ram,
very well. I never run out of ink.
Ram, could you please put the details of the book into the chat?
No, could you just hold up the book, Ram?
Well, he's going to put the details in the chat box, Julian.
All right. Okay.
I think you find that.
I think Julian's point about innovation isn't just limited to product or process, but as you've just described, there's a huge opportunity for innovation in business models. You know, the servitization model has been around a long time. I remember implementing one over 25 years ago, and that allowed us to shift from supplying parts into huge plants to actually supporting the engineers on the plant to run the plant more efficiently. Now, not only did it provide a huge benefit to the customers, but our margin went through the roof. It also meant that we were in control of the channel of our product and our competitors' product into our customers, and could optimize the amount of product that we could put in. The biggest benefit, however, was we got far more insight, detailed insight into how our product worked. Because our relationship was deeper, we were able to then improve our design and put all sorts of wonderful bells and whistles in there, like you know, electronic feedback and so forth, so we could continuously improve. So often there's a relationship between your business model, your product innovation, and then in order to meet that, you've got to have your process innovation that can deliver it as well. So innovation has got a huge ecological impact to it, not just, you know, a kind of micro level in product or process.
Yeah, it's quite a few years ago now, but Rolls-Royce stopped selling aero engines. They make them, but they don't sell them. What they sell is power.
Yeah, they sell thrust, don't they? I mean, they're the same.
They sell thrust.
Xerox.
And IBM were doing this with computers, of course, 40 years ago.
Yeah, I think IBM is the model that I looked at, because they were, I was finding difficulty selling this as a conceptual thing, and I came across IBM's Priceberg advertising they were doing, and I nicked that, and it was a revelation when I went, and I added theory of constraints to it. So, you know, this is why you're finding it difficult, because these constraints, you know, you're unaware of them, but the hidden cost is this. And yeah, that IBM thing was, if you like, my guide.
What did you say? What was the term you used, or the campaign they were running, Bob? I'd like to go and have a look at that.
What the IBM guys in the it was donkeys years ago, but they used to show a thing called an iceberg, which nowadays people term it as a priceberg, which is what you see above the water is the purchase cost of the product. What you don't see below the water is the total ownership cost of the product. And if you begin to shift your perspective to total ownership cost, then someone with a servitized program is supposedly there to actually demonstrate to you, we can shrink your total cost of ownership, because you're diminishing all the costs under the water. So you may actually increase the cost above the water, but the total pyramid, the total priceberg, if you like, actually shrinks quite substantially. I mean, we were demonstrating 30% price shrinkage. That was huge. You know, and for the likes of people like Shell and ICI, that was big numbers.
That's amazing. What company were you with, Bob, then?
It was a company called John Crane.
I'm just watching the chat box, some interesting to's and fro's, and Steve mentioned eBay as a way of repurposing shoes, ladies' shoes. But of course, that's one thing that the online world has given us, is this ability to create secondary, tertiary markets for just about anything. If you want something, from illegal drugs through to near illegal anything you like, through to cars, whatever, everything is accessible if you know where to look. And that does argue in favor of having a product quality with a longer lifespan. You don't have to hang on to it. As we were saying earlier, you can just pass it around. Ram, hi.
A couple of things, Nick. It's funny thing you said where to look. You know this coffee pot I showed you earlier? This is by a French artist called Jacques Carleman, and the book is called Catalogue of Unfindable Objects. As in, even if you look, you cannot find it. And that's it's called the coffee pot for masochists is what it's called. and it's part of a catalog of unfindable objects. I mean, even if you look, apparently you can't find it. I mean, it's just, I don't know. So yeah.
Okay. Rowan.
I think on this innovation thing, Nick, you know, one of the things that because I've got the business split across quite different from manufacturing into other sort of like crafts and things like that with what I do. I mean, one of the interesting things for me is in the past few weeks, a gentleman I know, Ollie Clark, who was a photographer, pet photographer, hit COVID, and he's now thought, what can I do now? So he's now gone out and sourced 20 artists, UK artists, to take his photography and put it into a manufactured jigsaw. He's then looked for a manufacturer of jigsaws in the UK and is now putting those onto the jigsaw and selling those. He's now created an online marketplace on Facebook. He's looked at the local areas, invited them to come in, and now promotes those craft and resources. He's already up to 2,500 people within the group. Now, these things, for me, when you buy local, bring the manufacturers of the future in, because his business could grow and go on to other things because he's had that innovation, he's had that entrepreneurial thing. That entrepreneurial thought is what drives manufacturing as well. It's where it's created from. It's that innovation. You know, and we've got to grow it. We've got to grow it in the UK. And it's so that buying local, when I see some of it, or what I've seen, has been fantastic in some of this manufacturing side, because I can see the potential of where it's going to go for them if they're guided.
Can I just say, Rowan had something to say. Rowan, you had your hand up a second.
Yeah, sorry. No worries. I just wanted to come back. Obviously, there's a lot of talk and the conversations flowed really nicely. So well done. But I just want to bring all of this kind of together in my point of view, which is, you know, we've spoken about brand value, protectionism, consumerism, a change in attitudes towards sustainability, everything as a service, innovation, sustainability. I think the one thing that wraps around, and Adam summed it up really nicely, is, you know, we live in a free society where we are free to make choices based on whatever criteria we decide. So the one common theme from all of this is the consumer, right? So what does the consumer want? You know, for example, for me, I know winter's coming. I know I'm going to be out walking 1 hour a day for the next month. So would I go to Primark and buy my welly boots, or am I going to order them online from Barber, right? Because personally, to me, I know that Barber is a high quality product. It'll last me, you know, through the winter and probably a few more, and I'll keep it. Whereas other people, the price point for Barber might be too high, and they'll say, well, actually, the sustainability aspect or the fact that I can buy a new pair every season doesn't bother me so much. And I think the one key wraparound for all of this is, what does your customer want? And the last point I just want to raise is who that customer is, right? If you're selling a machine, if you're selling a laser machine, you know, from one, you're manufacturing it and you're selling it to another manufacturer who's using it, obviously that manufacturer is going to want it to be extremely high quality, long lasting, maybe coming with a service package, whether it's rental or buying it outright. But for a consumer, if you're creating direct to consumer, say you're creating beer or something like that, the criteria change vastly. So I think we all just need to have in mind that we do live in a free society. However, the attitudes are changing, but at the end of the day, we all have a customer to answer to.
And it does the customer ultimately drive everything? There are once in generation changes. I would say the iPhone was one of those, because previously cell phones, mobile phones were sort of commoditized, really, or getting close to it. The iPhone changed everything, and it created a new paradigm. Consumers didn't know they wanted the iPhone because nothing like it ever existed before. So it is possible to change the market from the top down. But more often than not, you're right. So the consumer is going to say, you know, is going to vote with their feet in their wallet. So that is going to be the way.
You can nurture the consumer. You can market, because that's sales and marketing. You can nurture the community, the consumer, by understanding your market, your messaging, media. You know, 3 basic principles. but it still comes down to the choice, their individual choice.
Yeah,
That's how you do it.
the only thing against that, Adam, I would say, would be things that create a societal cost. So, for example, alcohol and cigarettes, right? Where we live in we do live in a society where there is some government intervention. So, you know, if it's machines that produce cigarettes, or there might be some additional taxes, I don't know, but the only thing that there is government intervention for is things that have a societal cost that need to pay for things like the NHS support for increased cancer care and things like that. But apart from that, we are quite lucky. We do live in quite a free society, and other countries don't necessarily have that freedom.
Fair point.
But screwing the planet as a societal cost.
You're right, it does actually, and that's why the government have stepped in with their sustainability plans. Right, there is now a tax for companies who are who have a CO2 footprint. So absolutely, it's up there with alcohol and cigarettes and petrol.
But and neither do I. I don't totally agree with you that things like Barber have make a better quality product, because I don't. The fashion stuff I've been associated with, the markup between manufacturing and what the consumer pays is at least somewhere in the region of a factor of 30, if not more. So in other words, sometimes I think the difference in price between what seems to be marketed as a high quality product and something that is perfectly functional from Primark, where my kids have bought loads of stuff, and it's lasted a long time even. I think there's an awful lot of marketing goes on there.
Absolutely, and that's the quality of marketing, right? Because my perception is now that Barber is a quality brand. So there you go. They've obviously done their job extremely well.
They're good at it, yeah. But
it's also
come the revolution.
Yes. It's also coming back to Adam's point, though, that the market, your consumers, because they have choice, essentially you need to know your tribe, or decide who your tribe is one way of saying it. So if you want to be conscious of various ethical things and look for an ethical tribe, then that's your choice. If you want to make a quick buck and sell to anybody who'll buy it, that's another choice. It all comes down to what your purpose is and being clear on your purpose, and then finding the people where you can sustain a business based on that. There are lots of unethical companies in the world. That's life.
Most of them probably, but hey ho.
Are we drawing anywhere near it? I mean, Julian sort of kicked this off a bit. Julian, do you think that we're reaching any kind of have we advanced the conversation, or just gone around the houses?
Well, but nobody said anything that's unwise. I would say.
Well, we'll take that to the bank.
yeah, but it's only because I'm pathetic, and I just want people to love me. I think the root of everything. Okay, here's my gripe. I mean, even though my dad was a manufacturer, etc., I've lived in a consumer marketing and sort of a product world, but the backbone of everything is innovation. I suppose that's what I want to say, and that I think if we could get manufacturing and the creation of real things, to be as exciting to the generation of people contemplating careers and whatever. I know it's a long-term play, but it's the most exciting thing in the world, innovation. And innovation spans obviously from why is it that iPhone 12 has, thank God, has got sharp edges to it, as opposed to the infuriating slip in your hand, wet bar of soap rounded edges. It's to do with the ability to pack more stuff into it. I'm sure it's a product design feature, but innovation can come, as I've alluded to, from things that are unglamorous. We've got to, that manufacturing things. When I was a what do you call them, a graduate apprentice, I worked for Wellworthy down in Hampshire, in Lymington. And the first job I had, I was on the link line, manufacturing Leyland piston rings. And even then, all those years ago, the most exciting thing that the chief executive stood up at, general meetings in the canteen at lunchtime and spoke about was some innovation that somebody had thought up to speed the process or whatever. So it doesn't have to be glamorous. But I think this is a rant, I'm sorry, but I think the really interesting thing is, how do we get interesting characters to not go into investment banking and into other stuff, but make them think that manufacturing real things that you can hold is the most exciting thing in the world. Yeah. All of our problems would be solved if we could do that.
Well, I wouldn't disagree.
It is interesting because there are those characters that do have a big impact on your life. There's one in this team here at the minute that had a big impact on mine as an engineer, and that's Mr. Gibbon, who's below me on my screen. And I remember Bob training me in looking at OEE and throwing a theory of constraints style of thought into the availability measure in taking out planning on production, because it was a bottleneck process and a constraint. So why would you take out any time where you could be working, and how you can work across breaks and things like that. And things like that I've dealt with Bob as an early age have had an impact on me going through my life. And that is, we spoke about this the other week, I think it was, is having these people that have that impact on you, on your life as an early age within the engineering. Yeah. We need those influencer people.
Yeah, mentoring. Mentoring is a really, really big factor in that's a whole nother subject, Nick. The power of mentoring and mentoring falling off the end of education into constantly in your life. It's a really big factor.
Yeah, it's amazing how many stories there are of that. When you hear inspiring stories, and of course there are so many of them, but almost a near constant feature is that at some point, somebody whose life may not necessarily have been destined to turn out terribly well found their lives changed because of somebody who stepped in and helped them as mentors. And yeah, Angela, please, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's not just mentoring. I think it's having good managers in place who encourage the thought processes and who encourage the innovation. I mean, Adam told us that story about that young lad that had been kicked out of school who put a motor on his push bike. And it's possible that lad might have ended up working on a production line in a factory. But has anybody ever gone to him and said, have you got any ideas? Do you have any thoughts on how this could be better or what we could do with this? And I think that's one of the important things as well, is having the managers in place to encourage those thought processes.
Yeah, I think that I certainly at a non-scientific level regard the quality of management in the UK as not necessarily optimal. I'm trying to be kind there. Some of it's absolutely bloody rubbish. But Bob, I'm sure you've got thoughts on that, and perhaps we could lead a discussion on that another night. It's 2 minutes to dinner time. I'd just like to show you something that Mark sent me by email earlier. Spot the deliberate mistake.
Burnt his elbow.
Mark, you were saying, is that a jet engine or is that a Rolls-Royce motor car's engine?
Yep, that's the media for us, or the mainstream media.
Yeah, so there we go. For as long as people think that jumbo jets are run by massive BMW engines, that is going to be our lot. Well, everybody, thank you very much. Thank you so much for attending. Lovely to see you, Bob. I haven't seen you for ages, and it's such a pleasure to see you. Adrian, good evening to you as well. Did you please send me your email address so that I can
I will do.
Throw into the weekly loop of madness that is my Kaizen email. And I am actually building, as I said, a page so that we can at least, offline, online, offline, we can, if you want to get hold of anybody or just check somebody out and check out their website, see what they're doing, maybe get a little bit of networking going. So that would be nice. So thank you very much for being with us. Appreciate it very much. Thanks for all the provocative thoughts and the odd little spark of controversy. I really enjoyed it. So until next week. Goodbye. And
see you all. Have a good weekend. Bye bye.
Have a great
Good night.
weekend.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye.